So in my late teens, I developed a curiosity of the Islamic faith, and I wanted to find out more. And on one occasion, I came out of the mosque on a Friday, and I bumped into someone giving out leaflets, and he was a young man. And the leaflet said it was a obligation to establish the Islamic State, the Khilafah. And I'd never heard this term before. So we started to engage and have a conversation, and what I witnessed was him talking about Islam in these kind of intellectual terms, talking about geopolitics, applying it to verses to the Quran, which I'd never seen before. So at that point, I was quite taken aback and very intrigued, and I maintained contact with this individual. The reason that we were calling for Sharia and the establishment of the Islamic State because we saw it as the only interpretation, the authentic interpretation of the Islamic faith. So being a young man and faced with these kind of ideas, not knowing the alternatives, not knowing the kind of flaws in those ideas, I just assumed that that was a true representation of Islam.
So would you say that you were an extremist in the past?
Yeah, I would most definitely say that I was an Islamist extremist, without a doubt. Yeah. What happened was I went through a couple of years of change, kind of a transition. There was an emotional and intellectual disconnect with what I was taught. The reason being because I was, for the first time, confronted with a contrast. What happened in the early stages when I was becoming radicalized, there was no contrast, there was no robust alternative. But then I managed to speak to other people, one person in particular who would tell me different interpretations, and the ideas that I held just didn't add up. And what happened over a period of 2 years is that I became more and more disillusioned with those ideas and decided to leave. You see, when people think of extremism, when people think of the problem of extremism, their mind goes to ISIS. ISIS isn't actually the root of the problem. They are on the periphery of the problem. The root of the problem is ultimately the ideas that underpin the existence of ISIS. And ISIS didn't create extremism, extremism created ISIS. And we need to challenge those broad spectrum of beliefs that are shared by extremists and what's within the Muslim communities. That's what we need to do.